Welcome to the New Mom Talk podcast, your go-to podcast for evidence-based answers to your burning questions about parenting. Join us as we dive into commonly Googled topics and hear from experts and real moms. Let's navigate parenthood together, one question at a time. Hi everyone! So today we're going to talk about mental load, and I am so excited with our guest, Paige Turner, who I feel like I'm girl crushing right now because I love everything that you talk about. I love following your page, and I think that you make such great valid points that a lot of people don't consider. Just even with the mental load, it was something that I didn't really think about so much, and I have a very supportive husband that helps me out with everything. I hate this term, but I stay home with my son, even though I don't stay home. But, so a lot of the stuff does end up falling on me just naturally, given the fact that I'm the primary caregiver. So that said, I really want to be able to share with moms and parents what the mental load is, what that means, especially as there's also more stay-at-home dads too.
Yeah, for sure. So the mental load is a tricky conversation. The mental load is hard to describe because it's invisible, right? And so that's the tricky part about the mental load. The mental load is all of the invisible mental work we're doing for the things that happen in our life. And I like to be clear that I think about the mental load as being for not just parents, but everyone, right? There's mental load at work, right? There's mental load in relationships with our siblings and our parents, right? Who's the sibling who always has to coordinate the gift for mom on Mother's Day, right? That's mental load. That's work. And I like to think about it as this running list in your brain that only ever gets longer. So no matter what, when you check something off, 2 more things get added because for example, it's I checked the lost and found for my son's water bottle. And when I was there, I saw that they're running a hat and glove drive. So now I need to buy hats and gloves and bring them back to the school. And also while I was there, the front desk told me that I need to sign this form and I have to bring it home. And it's, the mental work that we're doing to remember everything that our house requires. That's the mental load. And it's often invisible unless you're the person doing it. And then obviously you know how much there is.
Yes. And it's interesting that you say that because, there are certain things, and I think a lot of the times you just automatically think oh, well, they enjoy doing it, or they're just more organized, or they're really good at it, which may be the case, but it also may be that they don't enjoy it.
Yes.
So before we go a little bit deeper into it, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do and the things that you tend to focus on your page?
Sure. So I am a mom of 4 kids. I worked full-time in e-commerce, and I started talking about the mental load just casually. I was just sharing my experience of what it was like to carry the mental load of motherhood in particular, and how my partner and I were working really hard to share that work. And my page as a whole is dedicated to talking about the inequities that tend to exist between men and women in marriage and parenthood, in the workplace, and how that bleeds into so many different areas. And a big part of that is the mental load, right? Even when we have partners who do their fair share of the chores, are they doing the work that goes into those chores, right? Are they cooking dinner? Maybe, but did they grocery shop, meal plan, or did they ask you what to cook, right? If they're not doing that work, then they might not be carrying the mental load. And so, I just started talking about that, and I found that women in particular really resonated with it because I think it's something that is so incredibly hard to articulate, especially when you're in it. And I know I felt that same way myself. And so, that's what I talk about. And I talk about it because I believe that we can share this work, and no one person should really have to carry the mental load alone.
Wouldn't that be a dream?
Yes.
So the next thing I kind of want to talk about is for parents that are the ones that are the main ones taking that mental load or carrying that mental load. How does all of this with managing the household, managing the family, managing all of the daily to-do tasks affect the ability for them to just take time for themselves?
Yeah. Well, often what it does is it leads to burnout, right? And so even when you have that opportunity to rest or relax or walk around the grocery store without your kids, you're exhausted, right? And so it often doesn't leave real room to kind of be a person outside of parenthood and maybe marriage or work, depending on what your life looks like. And so what I found is that for women who have an unequal division of labor and unequal division of carrying that mental load, they tend not to have the same amount of time for things like hobbies or rest or friendship because they're carrying so much. And so I think it really can be incredibly detrimental to a person if they are carrying kind of an unfair share of this work.
I love that you kind of mentioned that just because of the fact when I think about like I see some of my some of my acquaintances or friends like make time for their friends and I'm like, gosh, I really wish I could like make time for that. But by the time, we're done with the to-do tasks, I'm exhausted and I just want to spend time with my husband.
Mm-hmm.
So it's kind of like I'm a little bit envious in a way, but at the same time, I'm like, I don't have the time.
Yes. And I think I was in a similar place where I was like, where's the time, right? Where's the time to go on a date night, see my friends, have a hobby, work out, right? And like go for a walk, whatever it is. Like, where's the time for that? There's no time. Like, how am I supposed to do all of those things and be a mother and have a job and be a good wife, right? Like that feels nearly impossible. And what I found is I think that depending on your stage of parenthood, some of this stuff is hard, right? When you have a lot of kids or young kids, this stuff is hard regardless of whether or not you have an equal partner. But what I have found is that when you have an equitable division of labor with your partner, you both get more time together, more time for friends, more time for hobbies. And I think that's a big complaint that we often see from men. Oh, once we had kids, like her whole focus went to the kids. And my question is often, well, does she get support with that work? Because if not, chances are she's too exhausted to find a babysitter to plan a date night, right? And so, like, yeah, you're probably right that her efforts have gone to that place. And the question is, what supports does she have in that work?
Yeah, well, that actually leads me into my next question. Like, what strategies based off of your experience have you found that can help reduce or create some sort of like a shared to-do task for those parents?
Sure. So I think there's like 3 steps I tend to identify. So it's one, just understand the terminology. Like, what is the mental load? Be able to describe the mental load. Be able to describe your mental load. Understand things like invisible labor. And just doing the work to be able to articulate what you're going through is really hard, right? So whether that's through therapy or following people on social media or listening to podcasts, reading books, I think one of the biggest struggles we have is being able to express ourselves in this conversation, to advocate for help. And that's a big hurdle. But once you have that, I think the biggest thing that any couple can do to really work towards equity and to kind of challenge this is to get on the same page about the work that's happening, making all of this invisible work, the mental load, as visible as you possibly can. So I'm a person who uses my reminders app on my iPhone, and I'm looking at it right now. I have it up on my computer and I have 45 reminders right now. And that is my mental load. And today alone, I have 11. So it's, making it visible. Like if my husband were to say, like, what's on your mental checklist today? I'd say, here you go. This is my mental checklist, right? But doing that, not just for the mental load, but kind of everything that's happening in your life, the actual tasks, the things that make your home function, make that work visible. And once you've been able to make that work visible with your partner, whether you do something like a spreadsheet, which I have available to people who want it, and it's based on like the fair play game, whether you do fair play with the deck of cards, if you're not familiar, it's a book and then a game to work towards equity. There's apps, right? There's apps out there to help you manage the mental load or even just to look at the mental load in your home. Doing that work of making it visible is step 1 or step 2. And then step 3 is doing the work of finding equity, right? Dividing up those tasks in a way that feels fair based on the nuances of your home, right? Your home is different than my home. I've got 4 kids. Some people have 2 kids. Some people have a job. Some people stay at home, right? Like everybody's home is vastly different. And so there is no one size fits all. And this is going to change all of the time based on the needs of your family. Sometimes your career might be on the back burner. Sometimes your partner's career might be on the back burner. Sometimes your kids need much more attention. Sometimes they don't. It just really depends. And I encourage people to kind of just constantly be having this conversation, because I think when we think about it as like a one and done, we often fall into old patterns and we don't, we end up having the same fight about the dishwasher over and over and over.
Oh my gosh, really good points, because like right now I'm expecting, so like I'm a lot more exhausted. I am, taking naps, and
of course,
my husband is so supportive in that, and like, okay, yeah, just go take a nap. I'll do this, I'll do that, and he works East Coast, West Coast hours, so he's always working. So it is, yeah, like that struggle of trying to figure it out, but always seeing that it's changing too.
Yeah. Yeah. 100%. Yeah. It's always evolving, right? I even think as your kids get older, their schedules change. Now they're doing taekwondo and dance 3 times a week. And it's like the work changes, the time changes, everything changes, right? Last year, every Monday night was like my night to go to hot yoga. It's not anymore. Oh, we've got dance till 6:30 at night every Monday. So it's like, life is always evolving and changing, and we just have to continue to be having those conversations and adjusting as we go.
Let's talk about a little bit more about the impact that mental load has on relationships with your partner, with the children, or with anyone that you have a relationship, whether it be friendships, grandparents, you name it.
Yeah. I think the mental load, when it's in a place where it's not fair or doesn't feel fair, one person is overloaded with mental load, it can lead to feelings like resentment. Right? It can lead to a real disconnect. It can be very hard as the person carrying the mental load if you're exhausted and burnt out to want to engage. You said earlier, like, oh, I just spend time with my husband at night. Like, there's points in time where women are like, yeah, we sit next to each other on the couch, but we don't speak, right? Because I'm exhausted and like I'm resentful and we don't have a conversation. And so I think it can lead to one, like burnout health wise for women, but it can also lead to feelings of resentment or frustration. And then on the receiving end of that resentment and frustration can be shame and defensiveness, right? These are really emotional things, right? Like there's so much emotion tied up in this work. And I think when we leave it unaddressed or in a place where it's not fairly shared, a lot of these emotions come out. That resentment comes out. And that is a really tricky thing to combat.
So, this next one, I kind of want to focus a little bit more on moms. This podcast tends to be targeted or geared more towards moms. And I think just when you become a parent, a lot of that is more moms having to deal with the nursing if you are doing that, with the recovery. So all of that said, how does carrying this mental load influence like just a mom's mental health and the emotional well-being on like their daily basis, whether you're in that newborn stage or in the stage that you are with kids that are slightly older?
Introducing the Mama Making Podcast, your go-to space for honest and empowering conversations about motherhood, pregnancy, and everything in between. Hosted by Jessica, a passionate mom navigating her own journey through motherhood, we deep dive into the highs and lows we all face as moms. Each Tuesday, tune in for candid chats with experts and moms, sharing practical parenting tips, new mom advice, and real-life stories that help you thrive. Whether you're expecting, dealing with postpartum challenges, or balancing life as a working mom, this podcast offers the community and support you need. Join us for discussions on self-care, mental health after childbirth, and the beautiful mess that is modern motherhood.
Sure. I think it so depends on, your family life, your kids, right? And the supports that you have. But I think when I think about the mental load for women and mothers in particular, I actually think it starts well before kids show up. And when we talk about the mental load of motherhood, I think if we really like zoom out and we look to when we first start having that decision or making that decision with our partner to try to have kids, who's tracking their ovulation, who's talking to the doctor about the best prenatals, who is figuring out what foods to eat and do I need to cut out caffeine? Like who's doing that work, right? That's a lot of work. And oftentimes that pressure falls to women and men joke like, I just have to show up. And it's like, no, but really kind of, right? Like you just have to show up and I'm doing all of this work to try to understand my fertility. And then we become pregnant if that's how you bring children into your family. And it's like, okay, well now I'm the one going to the doctors and watching what I eat and checking my blood pressure and I'm responsible for all of this and keeping this information. And that can be a lot too, right? And so by the time the baby comes, mom has already assumed a lot of responsibility to make sure this child gets here safely. And when that baby is here, I think even the way that we treat parents in the hospital really pushes the work to mom, right? I don't know if you had this experience, but when I was in the hospital, it's like, Mom, how's the baby eating? Mom, has the baby pooped? Mom, has the baby this? And it's like, why are we only asking me? I was trying to take a nap. Like, can you ask him? The guy like right there. And there's this emphasis placed on mom. And I understand it in a sense from the feeding perspective, et cetera. But if we're talking about diapers, my husband can tell you about those diapers too, right? And so the lack of paid parental leave in our country often means that women are the ones staying home, paid or unpaid, and they're assuming a lot of the responsibilities very early on. And what will happen is, I've heard from so many women who will say, my husband didn't get any time off. So I was doing all the overnights and I was with the baby every single day. And he went to work and yeah, he helped when he got home, but the majority was on me. But then when I went to work, it stayed with me, even though now he and I were both working full time. I still did the overnights. I still did everything with the baby because now I'm quote unquote better at it. I'm better at getting the baby to stop crying. I know what the baby needs, right? And it's this idea that of course she does. She's done work for the past 2 to 3 months to get there. And that is how this kind of compounds over time. And it can lead women to feel really a lot of things mentally, right? It can lead to things like depression and anxiety and just an overwhelming, we talk about mom rage, right? And people talk about that. I think all of these are so tied to the idea that it's just becoming a parent is such an overwhelming experience. But when you're the person tasked with bearing the responsibility or the bulk of the responsibility of the actual work of parenting, it can feel much harder.
Well, and I think that naturally kind of tends to then make you the default parent. And usually the mom tends to be the default parent, but right? If you're the one that's doing the primary, all of that care, it's oh, you're so much better at it. Baby's going to want you.
Yeah. Or when I was, I don't know, 8 months postpartum with my last child, my husband, she was home with us, but we had a nanny. And so I worked from home, but we had a part-time nanny who would care for her. That way I could actually get work done. My husband one day said, when does she get her bottle? And I was like, how do you not know this? And I was like, how do you not know when she gets a bottle? You're her daddy. He's like, well, you're home with her all day. And I said, I'm home with her all day, but I'm also working the same way that you're working. I'm just physically in the house and you're outside of the house, right? And I said to him, I said, hey, imagine we both went to an office every single day and she was home with the nanny. Would you expect the nanny to tell us when the baby ate, or would we still tell the nanny when the baby should be eating? I was like, because I'm physically near this baby more does not mean that I'm the only decision maker here, the only person who can research how much formula she should have and when she should be having it and what her wake window should be right? I'm not the only person who can do that work just because I'm physically closer to her during the day. So we can share that work. Even if our partners go to the office and we stay home full time, our partners can still share that work with us. It doesn't require proximity to be able to say, hey, you know what? I was reading and I think we should start solids and try this method because I think for X, Y, and Z reason, that would be a good idea. Anybody can do that work and should do that.
Yes, such a valid point, because I feel this is even the case with something, for example, with the diaper bag or something very simple. The other day, my husband asked me if we had tissues, and I frustratingly looked at him and I said, well, did you look? And he said, yeah. I said, okay, well, where did you look? I'm just very simply, I know that I can tell you and it would probably be really easy to tell you, but you also live in this home and you should also know where those tissues are, because what if I wasn't home?
Right. Well, and that's the thing too. There was I had a video go viral a few years ago when my husband and I were really working towards equity. My husband decided to be the owner of the grocery shopping, right? That's his thing. He's going to do the grocery shopping. There was a day he was sitting on the couch and we do online ordering, as a lot of people do. And he was like, do we have jelly? I was like, I don't know. He's like, do we need more yogurt for the kids? And I'm like, oh my gosh, stop asking me these questions. Stand up, walk to the fridge and look at it. Why are you asking me? He's like, well, I know you know. And I'm like, but isn't that really telling that I know, right? That I'm so in tuned with what's in the fridge and what the kids are eating that I can tell you off the top of my head if we need it or not. Yet you're the person who owns the groceries. I was like, that doesn't, right? You're not doing that mental load of the groceries. You're still expecting me to tell you what to get. And that is the work that I think is harder to change, right? It's harder to change that second level to the conversation, which is my husband's happy to buy the groceries and put them away. But at the time, he didn't understand that he also had to be the one taking inventory and understanding what the kids are eating or not eating. And we had an egg allergy, what she can and can't have, what brands work, what brands don't, right? I can't be the only person carrying that in my brain, right? And so I think that's the deeper level to this conversation that often gets missed when we talk about kind of having equity at home, people are like, "Well, he does a lot of stuff," and that's probably true, but can he do it without you? Like, without your participation, without your input, and what would the end result look like if so?
Yes, it's so true. Like also told my husband, like next time I want you to take care of the diaper bag. Like I don't want you to open the diaper bag and ask me, "Where's his bib?" Look,
Yeah, yeah,
it's
yeah.
in there.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and it's, here's the thing. I like to say this, and I think it's important to call out that I do not believe that this is an individual failure of our husbands, that this means they are not good dads or good husbands. It is societally ingrained in us that women are just inherently good at this stuff, right? But women aren't just good at remembering what's in a diaper bag or remembering where the bib was last, right? Like they're doing the work, which is why they know. And so it's not necessarily a failure of you or your partner. If you're listening to this and saying like, oh my gosh, I see this in me or in my partner, we were kind of conditioned to show up in these ways in parenthood, and it's hard to kind of change that conditioning unless we're aware of it. And once we're aware of it, we can do the work to make changes. And then if you're aware of it and you still don't change, that's a separate question, separate conversation. But in an ideal world, like we're married to partners who are willing and able to understand that, like, yeah, there's a second layer to all of this work that you also have to do.
Well, and it's really funny because I feel like you have to have a better memory and recall. And we often talk about mom brain, which means you tend to forget a lot of things. And I do. Like, there's been times where I have, like, I don't know, like, I finished making breakfast and I left the stove on. And my husband came down and it's like, well, see, but this is because my brain, it has so many things going on. Like, in the morning, I have to think about unloading the dishes, reloading the dishes, feeding X amount of humans, feeding X amount of dogs. Like there is just so much that I don't think about. Did I turn off the stove?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. And it's interesting how little things can change that dynamic, right? My husband leaves for work before anybody's awake in the house, including myself. And I remember sometimes he would drop the ball. He'd like forget to unload the dishwasher or something. And he wouldn't think it was a big deal. And I'm like, but when you don't do that, right? Now you've thrown my whole morning off, and I have 4 kids and a dog with me. You're by yourself, right? And so we had a conversation about what it could look like for him to be supportive of me in the mornings, even though he's not physically present. And that means he takes the dog out before he leaves. He feeds the dog. He fills up all of the kids' water bottles for me. He makes sure the dishwasher is emptied. He does all of that before I've even opened my eyes in an effort to support me while I'm by myself with the kids. To your point, doing breakfast, getting 4 kids dressed, brushing their teeth, packing their backpacks, getting their lunches, getting them in the car, making it to the bus stop on time, right? Like this stuff, our mornings get away from us because there's just so much going on. And so having support is so helpful in those moments. Even if a person can't physically be present with you, they can still provide support in other ways.
Yes. So one of my last questions, you already kind of mentioned some different supports and tools, but would you be able to offer just any specific maybe apps, or I am going to have all of your contact info in the show notes. So I know that you did mention some supports that you provide, but anything that can make the mental load feel more manageable for moms, dads, parents.
Yes. There's a few books that I highly recommend reading. So I really like Fed Up by Gemma. I'm blanking on her last name right now. Rose Hackman has a book called Emotional Labor that I think is great. And then there's Fair Play, which I'm a big fan of, by Eve Rodsky. Fair Play has a game, which I referenced earlier, that is meant to help strive towards equity. I have a spreadsheet. I can provide the link that also helps you do the game if you're more of like a spreadsheet gal than a deck of cards person, which is who I am. Then there's apps. There's plenty of apps out there, but Coexist, Maple, Persist, these are all different apps that you can try. And we love our Skylight calendar in our house. There's so many things that you can use these days with technology to just get on the same page with your partner. And I think that's really what it's about. It's like, just get on the same page, work together to hopefully have a really highly functioning home where everybody's feeling supported and has time for themselves and for each other. And if technology helps us do that, then that's amazing.
Yeah. Well, my last question, any other tips, suggestions, or recommendations?
I think my tip is that everything takes time. So it's very easy to get frustrated in doing this work and to feel like it's taking too long for your partner to understand or to change in a real way. And I just want to remind us that it's okay to be patient in this work if people are truly putting in an effort. Because, like I said, we're trying to like break down societal conditioning that we've had our entire lives very quickly, and that doesn't always happen. And so I think having some grace for one another in this is really, really important. But also, like, if you are in a privileged position to be able to do it, like I think therapy, individual therapy, couples counseling, all those things can really help too when you navigate this conversation. Because sometimes as moms in particular, we don't know how much we're carrying until we like say it out loud. Like sometimes my therapist will be like, "How are you?" And I'm like, "Oh, I'm good. Nothing really is happening." And then I'll like just start talking to her and she's like, "Sounds like actually quite a lot's happening." Like, what do you mean nothing's happening? Because we're so in the weeds, right? And so sometimes it's helpful to just like take a deep breath and step back. And so if you're able to, I always think that is also a tip.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate you coming on and being
Of
able
course.
to just share your knowledge on all of this. And again, I'll have all of your info linked in the show notes. If you don't already,
Thank you.
please follow because her stuff is amazing. So
That's very kind of you. Thank you so much for having me.
thank you for listening. Tune in next week for our next episode. You can find us on Instagram for more updates and tips. Be sure to subscribe wherever you listen to your podcasts and give us a review if you like us.